This chapter sort of really looks at how a novel that came out in very soon after the passing of the 1842 Copyright Act talks about its influence and also talks about the life of the female journalist and specific ways in which that was impacted. So today's talk is called Entitling the Woman Writer, the 1842 Copyright Act and the Female Journalist in Eliza Maiteyard's Struggles for Fame. Eliza Maiteyard's novel Struggles for Fame began its life as a short story entitled Scenes in the Life of an Authoress. This was published anonymously in 3 installments between December 1843 and April 1844 in Tate's Edinburgh magazine, a shilling monthly which promoted the principles of self-help. The story, which depicted the early life of Barbara Chisenhale, and often gifted with exceptional literary talent, reinforced the journal's support for women's authorship, but ended prior to the publication of its heroine's first book. The novel, Struggles for Fame, published a year later in 1845, carried Barbara's story forward. This neglected novel offers one of the earliest fictional representations of the female journalist. The novel's episodic plot follows the fortunes of Barbara, who, determined to earn her living by writing, wages a hard and occasionally lonely struggle with the conditions of the literary market, contributing to various ill-paying periodicals and newspapers before shifting to book writing and becoming a celebrated woman of letters. This novel, which began its own life as a serial story, also draws attention to the failure or the gaps in the recently passed copyright legislation to safeguard the interests of periodical contributors. The Copyright Act of 1842, which for the first time extended authors' copyright beyond their own lifetime, supported the idea that the best of authors were likely to receive their due from the market gradually and over a long period. As Catherine Seville, Claire Petit, and others have shown, the very notion that an author had proprietary rights over his or her production was historically based on an understanding of the writer as an inventor of a novel idea. Since journalists worked collaboratively and often under direct instructions from periodical editors and owners, it was particularly difficult to identify the source of originality and to treat the periodical writer as the sole creator of a literary work. Drawing on recent scholarship on copyright in periodicals by Will Slater and others, my presentation will focus on this crucial novel and elucidate its representation of the literary market, conditions of authorship, and the professionalization of women writers in the wake of the 1842 Copyright Act. The first part of my presentation will focus on Barbara's working life as a journalist as represented in the novel. Now, Barbara first considers pursuing authorship as a paying profession when she feels compelled by her sense of duty to provide financial assistance to her loving and aging guardian, Adam. She asks him if there is, quote, no means of getting money by the learning drawn from them, i.e. books. Is there no way of being industrious, unquote. Adam recommends that she foster her love for literature, yet build not too much upon the hopes it brings. Trust for thy bread to the labor of thine hands, and thou wilt be sure of it. Thou hast aptitude, you may not have genius, 'tis given only to the few. Unquote. Now, Adam's image of the worthy writer is strikingly similar to that of a worthy, industrious laborer, one who ekes out their living by the labor of their hands. As Claire Petit has shown, 19th century debates about copyright law pivoted around conceptions of labor, particularly mental labor, and its conception pivoted around questions such as what kind of labor did writers enter into, how far were they to be financially rewarded for this, and for how long, and what did they owe the general public? When would their claim die out and things become public property, for example? Now, this novel too engages with these questions, but in the context of assessing writing as a means of earning a livelihood for its female protagonist. Now, while Maiteyard invokes the rhetoric of humble industry to justify Barbara's public remunerative authorship, She also emphasizes the detrimental effects of limiting the professional ambitions of female writers to mere survival. Barbara's experiences as a journalist struggling to make ends meet include battling the physical and sexual dangers of working for cheap and low-paying periodicals. Strikingly, these experiences do not translate in the novel into an injunction against the woman writers' participation in the market, but actually intensify the novel's criticism of the lack of support for ordinary industrious writers. And I'll elaborate on this as I go on. So very quickly, a snapshot of Barbara's early career as a writer. She begins by working as an assistant to a hack writer named Mr. Pickling and helps him produce cheap handles and sundry, quote unquote, reams of wholesale trash and immorality for Mr. Small's printing establishment, which is located in the infamously squalid Seven Dials neighborhood. And when Pickling starves to death, Barbara finds work, again as a hired writer for the firm of Kilpeck and Quick, who are penny aligners. So this is her first sort of direct work in the press. Now, who were the penny aligners? Penny aligners were amongst the lowest paid freelance newspaper reporters and occasioned considerable commentary in the mid-century press. They were derided for their lower class status and sensational style of writing, and suspected of cheating newspaper editors and readers by making up false reports. Yet, such commentators also recognized that penny aligners were important sources of information for the press, and this created quite a lot of fear about authenticity and so on and so forth. But they were recognized as important sources of information for the press, especially on urban crime and violence. And commentators would very commonly express concern that the newspapers relied on such unofficial and largely unaccountable channels rather than on their salaried reporters for their news. Kilpeck and Quick get Barbara to write their sensational news reports, and since she does not personally gather news, it would appear that these reports are unsubstantiated. They also said Barbara whole weeks of quote-unquote invention work in which she entirely fabricates news. Now, crucially, all of Barbara's early editors and managers defraud her of due payment. Now, despite the fact that she, with her rare wit and ready invention, helps to single-handedly raise the fortunes of Kilpeck and Quick, she is given neither credit nor due payment. Quote, to their hack no praise was given. Barbara from hour to hour plied a weary pen without one comfort unless there be comfort in reproach, unquote. The novel is also obviously written in a sentimental vein. But it's important to note that the status of being a hired writer also means that this kind of defrauding is actually everywhere in her experience, her early experience as a journalist. Now, when a starring Barbara entreats Kilpeck and Quick to make the outstanding payment for a whole month's work, Kilpeck proposes marriage as a substitute for the payment due to her. His unwelcome amorous advances imposed on Barbara when she's at her most vulnerable and made in an office whose only other inhabitant is Kilpeck's male partner and supporter, is probably one of the earliest representations of sexual harassment in the workplace. Now, although this proposal is not elaborated upon, it foregrounds the sexual danger specific to the aspiring female journalist. And Barbara leaves the firm immediately. In the broader chapter, I have a discussion of what showing women journalists at work actually entailed. It entailed reimagining codes of conduct for women in Victorian England, women at work in Victorian England. What does it mean to work in close collaboration with men and under the guidance of male editors? What does it mean to inhabit newspaper offices, for example? And how do you then ensure that in the case of Barbara, it can only sort of be safeguarded by her exit, and she does exit. Now, this kind of economic exploitation of writers is shown to be common across the low-priced and popular newspapers and periodicals. For example, Barbara also writes for another newspaper, The True Thunderbolt, whose editor, Mr. Twidican, calls on her repeatedly telling her that his paper had a poet's corner or an empty column for a few political truths. These are his words. And although Barbara writes something every week, we are told, she receives little but, quote unquote, the politest compliments of the editor. Now, even though Meteor shows the lower ends of journalism attracting writers like Barbara who are desperate to make ends meet, she underlines that it is, in fact, a financially unsustainable avenue of authorship. So it isn't quite meeting that goal with which she had set out first, earning the bread of independence, because she finds that she's highly dependent, defrauded of payment, completely without control of conditions of writing, so on and so forth. Barbara's struggles draw attention to the gaps in the Copyright Act of 1842, particularly in relation to the remuneration and literary property of periodical contributors. Within the 1842 Copyright Act, this issue of copyright in periodicals is addressed in section 18, which dealt with copyright in, quote, any encyclopedia, review, magazine, periodical work, or work published in a series of books or parts, unquote. So any kind of serial periodical publication. This section set out a general rule which granted the property in all such publications to that lot, quote, proprietor, projector, publisher, conductor, provided the contributor, i.e. the periodical writer, was employed and paid to compose such a work on terms that the copyright would belong to the publisher. So it had to be employed and paid to compose that work on specific terms that had been put forward. Now, as Elena Cooper has noted, this rule was based on the assumption that periodical authors were well remunerated, whereas in fact, rates of pay differed vastly across different publications, and sometimes even within the same publication, with some writers getting a raw deal. Although the letter of the law required that periodical contributors consent to the publisher holding copyright over their work, the courts commonly interpreted this requirement as having been implicitly and sufficiently fulfilled for all paid contributions. And I just wanted to foreground that Elena Cooper has done fantastic work in actually looking at actual legislations, like there's the letter of the law, as is the Copyright Act, but also its interpretation within the courts, which shows that there's a difference. And so even if the letter of the law said that, you had to have explicit stipulation, this agreement, etc., the courts often interpreted this as having been implicitly fulfilled, provided you were paid, so it was assumed that this had been done. Now, by showing Barbara being repeatedly and brazenly defrauded of due payment by editors and publishers at the lower end of the periodicals market, Meteor highlights the plight of those overlooked by the existing copyright regime. The Act did allow authors to retain copyright through an explicit contract and had it revert to them after 28 years. It also stipulated that in the case of all periodical publications, except encyclopedias, quote, the contributor retained control over the publication of the contribution in separate form, despite the vesting of the property in the publisher. So you could, through explicit contract, sort of retain this. However, such caveats did little to alleviate the distress of journeyman writers who lacked the power to negotiate contracts, were dependent on immediate payment for their daily needs, and whose writings, in being custom-made for quick and ephemeral reading, were unlikely to have republication value. The novel suggests that it is precisely because even exceptionally talented writers like Barbara have no agency within this particular market, that managers like Kilpeck and Quick and all the others, the editors that she's working for, can use them to debase the public taste further. The difference between the immensely beneficial writing that Barbara is capable of offering her readers and what she's forced to do as an employee of the lower press shows that it is not merely the writer, but also the mass of readers who suffer when the author does not have adequate financial security and artistic freedom. Meteor represents periodical editors and owners as approaching authorship merely as a business venture and suggests that it is only if authors are protected that even cheap publications can become socially beneficial. Now, this, of course, links back to wider debates about professionalization. The writer is not a tradesman. The writer is a vocationally impaired person versus publishers, printers, so on and so forth. There are internal debates that are in play vis-a-vis who has the best interests of the public at heart. The novel also highlights, strangely and interestingly, the unsavory associations that came to attach to the woman writer with particular force after the passing of the 1842 Copyright Act. As Catherine Gallagher has noted, since the mid-18th century, when the identity of text and self began to be emphasized, and when, quote, texts as distinct from books were commodified by copyright law, quote, writers in the marketplace were put in the position of selling themselves like whores, unquote. After the 1842 Copyright Act, as Gallagher has argued, the writer did not, quote, go to the market as a respectable producer with an alienable commodity, but with himself or herself as commodity, unquote. Now, what is remarkably striking about this novel is that for all the defrauding in the lower press, it is only when Barbara turns to book writing that she's mistaken for a prostitute. Barbara naively believes that book writing, unlike lower journalism, is a merit-based profession, it's enlightened, it's better, or so on and so forth. So unlike Barbara's alienated journalism, her book is a labor of love with which she identifies closely and owns independently. In a remarkable depiction of book writers' this inability to distinguish themselves from their commodities, Barbara is shown as personally carting around her manuscript to potential publishers. This is developed in a nightmarish sequence in which she is laughed at, thrust out of various places, and actually includes the only instance where, evidently suspected of being a prostitute, she is, quote unquote, threatened with police action. The strikingly literal representation of the writer as prostitute anticipates the visual configuration of the female artist in the marketplace in Emily Mary Osborne's famous 1857 painting, Nameless and Friendless. And this is my 1857. I'll just, sorry, maybe I should, yeah. Sorry, what did I do? I tried to go, sorry, I hope that's clear enough. Is that, I tried to do full screen. Oh, there it is. As Linda Nochlin has observed, Osborne's painting shows an impoverished gentlewoman trying to sell her art in a dealer's shop. And, quote, there is more than a hint conveyed by the ogling male loungers who lift their eyes from a print of a scantily clad dancing girl to scrutinize the young woman artist that merely being out in the world at all, rather than safely home, opens a young, unprotected woman to suspicion, unquote, and of course, the suspicion is of sexual availability. In Maitland's novel, Barbara's traumatic encounter with seedy book publishers disabuses her of her naive ideas about book writing being an inherently more genteel and safe avenue of authorship than journalism. Having described the problems faced by the female journalist in great detail, Maitland provides a rushed and unconvincing resolution in the last part of the novel. Barbara carefully considers two competing models of successful authorship, as represented by the popular writer, Mr. Kickshaw, and the writer of genius, Mr. Newfielding. She decides to adopt the shining example of the latter, and shortly thereafter, her illustrious parentage is revealed. She is revealed to be the daughter of a very famous editor and so on and so forth. Parents who are no longer alive, but that's the illustrious literary sort of legacy that she comes from. She finds herself to be the legatee of another wealthy printer, and she soon becomes a celebrated book writer. So literally extracted from all of that need to negotiate the market, which actually pretty much propels the whole novel. Now, the ending of the novel thus hurriedly deflects attention from the central problem of women's professional authorship, remuneration, credit, all of that it had constructed so painstakingly. Yet, the very premise of this ending reveals one of the more enabling aspects of particularly anonymous journalism. Barbara can move from being a low journalist to a respectable woman of letters because her previous identity as a hack writer is untraceable. Her lack of ownership over her anonymous writings, the fact that her identity was subsumed entirely by the papers and periodicals she worked for. So there's no imprint of style also that is left on these papers because she was writing to order, defrauded of payment, no real credit. So there's absolutely no sense of identification with that. And it's because of this that paradoxically, she's enabled to start a new life as a high-minded book writer. She comes out of her career as a hack, wiser for having suffered many hardships and indignities, but with an unmarked reputation. It's particularly important, of course, as a woman writer. I want to, and this is really where the novel sort of ends, but I do want to end my own talk by thinking of and looking very briefly at a very interesting afterlife in the press of this particular concern with credit, ownership, particularly in the context of the copyright and so on and so forth. So in the decades that followed, women writers would similarly comment on the difficulties of claiming copyright within journalism in order to assert their desire for greater financial rewards and public recognition. And one instance of this, I mean, it's not explicitly stated as a copyright issue, but it, of course, calls into account exactly these kind of concerns that we've been noticing. Now, and this happens in the wake of the international copyright debates, which happened in the 1870s. In this context, Caroline Norton, of course, this famous writer from the earlier in the period, and who, after separating from her abusive husband, had successfully campaigned for the 1857 Matrimonial Causes Act that gave separated women writers ownership over their authorial income. So this is a writer who's already had a sort of an experience of negotiating with legislation and arguing for legislation in relation to her own authorial income. And so in the 1870s, she writes to the Times alleging a breach of copyright. Norton alleged that Ellen Wood had stolen the plot of her spectacularly successful Eastland from her own short story, published in a literary annual that had since closed. And Norton claimed that she had, quote, always intended to expand the story, to put an underplots, and to republish it as a 3-volume novel, unquote, but had been unable to do this partly because of, what she called the difficulty of procuring the book, which contained the original, which was out of print. So the annual had gone out of print. She had so literally gone out without a trace, as it were. Now, though Norton's claims were emphatically denied by Wood in a subsequent letter to the Times, her complaint shows that there was clearly a sense that the 1842 Act had not given sufficient cover, had not guarded sufficiently the republication rights of the periodical writer, who hadn't fully accounted for the very wide range of republication issues that were likely to come up in the context of periodical and newspaper publication. Now, on the one hand, as Linda Hughes and Michael Lund have noted, the gradual development of characters in serial fiction could create a particularly strong bond between the reader and the writer. And this was witnessed, for example, they have this lovely instance of the personal appeals that readers would make to writers of serial fiction, asking that they provide happy resolutions to plots or to return, to sort of bring about the return of favorite characters from disaster or even death. On the other hand, as is evident from Norton's complaint, the brevity and ephemerality of a periodical publication meant that such work and their authors could very quickly fade from public memory, particularly if the publication itself died out and had not created this kind of a lasting impact. By representing the female journalist's struggles for lusting fame in a positive light, Maillard paves the way for greater public articulation of some of these concerns and channels it towards thinking of ways in which women writers' professional ambitions could be thought of more constructively. I think I'll end there. Thank you.